Hey everyone, it's Kate, and today I'm going to show you how to make the flutter sleeves on the Charli Anne Wrap Dress. I'm wearing the Charli Anne at this very moment, and you can see the sleeves. The main difficulty of flutter sleeves is that they have a curved hem, so I'll be showing you some tips and tricks to do that. And I do want to mention that today is the first day of our semi-annual sale. We only have 2 big sales a year, and we're having one right now, September 5th through September 12th, and the whole store is 20% off. Before I jump into the flutter sleeves, I'm going to show you a little mistake I made when I cut out the bodice of this dress. So I just quickly grabbed my pattern pieces because I'd made this before and cut out the bodice. Can you see this okay? Okay. And I was going really fast because I'm really just talking about the sleeves, but I needed to cut out the bodice to talk about the sleeves. And you can see that the front is super on the bias. It's a very long bias cut for both sides of the front. And in the minutes it took me to carry this pattern piece from the cutting table to the sewing area, this edge grew at least an inch, maybe an inch and a half. So I wanted to talk a little bit about how to avoid that and what to do if it happens to you. So what I did was grab the pattern piece again, always have it close at hand, and compared it to my new stretched out edge. And then I grabbed the iron and just steamed. And I kind of pushed with my fingers to make the fabric shrink again so that it was the same length as the pattern piece. And then I whipped out our woven stay tape. It's really nice stuff because it's fusible and it's very, very fine, so it doesn't add any weight to your project. And this is 1/2 inch. We also have it in 1 inch. We have it in black, but it doesn't really stretch, and it is great for reinforcing bias edges like this, and also shoulder seams. So if you're making this dress, as soon as you cut out the front pieces, press some of this woven stay tape to your project and don't make the same mistake I did. I'm going to put this aside for later and start talking about the flutter sleeve. So the biggest difference between a flutter sleeve and a regular sleeve is that the flutter sleeve has this really long curved edge. And it's very hard, as you probably know, to hem a curved edge because as you turn up the fabric, it tends to fold over and get wavy and not want to behave. And it's also hard to know where this has a 1/2 inch hem. It's hard to know where the 1/2 inch is as you're turning up a curve. So I take a lot of steps, and they may seem like a lot of steps, but they make your life much easier. So the first thing I do is just grab a ruler and mark a 1/2 inch from the edge all the way along. And this kind of yellowishness is my chalk mark at the 1/2 inch. And then I go to the sewing machine and sew along that chalk mark. I use a relatively short stitch because we don't want any gathering or puckering, but that's really just kind of thread marking where I want to turn my hem. It's kind of like perforating an edge of the paper, and it makes your life much easier. So after I've done that, I get my 1/2 inch woven knit stay tape, which looks a lot like the woven, but it's actually knit, and it does have some stretch to it. And because of the stretch, it will curve right along your curve and also add a lot of stability to the hem. So when you sew it, the stitches will just look gorgeous. So using the iron, I ironed on the fusible side of the knit stay tape right along the edge. And then with all of that done, I'm going to pull my pressing surface. Let's see, how does that, is that a good? Yeah. Okay, good. So with both of those done, you can use your fingers to get the hem in place. So there's everything's ready, and I can kind of use my little perforation of the stitches, and I can feel the edge of this fine stay tape. And one of my favorite things to do is get everything in place and pin my hem to the ironing surface. I have spent many years chasing my finger with a hot iron, trying to get the fabric in place and burning. And I love this method of just pinning right to the ironing board. These pins and our glass head pins, you can iron right on top of them and not worry about them melting. So these are like perfect pins or something, but they're really nice. So I just iron right on top of my pinning. And then you can remove the pins. The next step is a little backwards from the way I used to do it, but I find it easier. So now, I don't want this raw edge on my hem. So after pressing it at the depth that I want it, then I press it under another 1/4 inch and kind of tuck the fabric into the valley that I've made with my first pressing. And once again, use the pins, but everything is just going into place beautifully. And once again, I'm not chasing my finger, so I'm just going to go about halfway. And because I have another version ready for the next step, so then you'll press that in place. And then you may feel ready to sew. But I do one more step. So I'm going to move this one. And this is my final step, which I'm going to flip the other way. I baste the hem in place with a big running stitch. This is a silk kimono thread that I've doubled up just to make sure you can see it. But from the wrong side, I just baste it really quick, and it doesn't take very long, but it holds the hem in place. And on the right side, you can see exactly where to sew. And with this really fine silk kimono thread, which I have doubled up just to make sure you can see it, it's so slippery that even if you end up sewing right on top of it, you'll still be able to pull it out. So this is ready to sew, and it's going to look amazing. So those are my main tips for sewing the flutter sleeve. And attaching the flutter sleeve to the garment is really quite the same as attaching a more normal, shall we call it, sleeve to a garment. But I still want to give you a few tips and tricks on this. With this pattern, the Charli Anne, she has you attach your sleeve on the, what I call on the flat. So before you sew your side seams, you sew the sleeve to the arm's eye. So this is the arm's eye, and then this is the sleeve cap. And as you can see, they are quite different shapes, and it can be challenging to sew them together. Oh, I don't want to use this as my example because I didn't put a snip in it, but oh my gosh. So oh, there it is, good. All right, so with the Charli Anne and many other patterns, she has you cut your sleeve on the fold. And so the front sleeve cap is exactly the same length as the back sleeve cap. But when you look here, hopefully you can see that this is the arm's eye in the back, and this is the arm's eye in the front. And the back arm's eye is much longer than the front arm's eye. So if you were to place the halfway mark on the shoulder seam, which is kind of the logical thing to do, you're going to have way too much fabric in the front and maybe a little too little in the back. So what I'm going to do, here's the shoulder seam, here's my halfway snip. I'm just going to move it about 1/2 inch toward the back arm's eye. And then what I like to do is pin at the side seam, because from the side seam to the first notch is always supposed to be 1-to-1. You don't have to worry about easing. But with this sleeve, there's more sleeve fabric than there is arm's eye fabric. And so you're going to be easing this sleeve cap into the arm's eye. And that can be challenging, especially when it's actually not that. I'm going to move it a little bit. Especially when you're doing it on the flat like this, and when the instructions don't have you do any gathering of the sleeve cap. I mean, in a traditional sleeve insertion, you do a little gathering at the sleeve cap and then get it in after you've sewn the side seam. But many patterns have you do it on the flat like this. And so I just wanted to give you a few tips and tricks. So this is a lot of pinning for me. I'm not a big pinner, so I don't overpin because I do a lot of moving things around at the sewing machine. But I use the feed dogs to help me ease the sleeve in. So remember that the sleeve cap is longer than the arm's eye. And so I'm going to put the sleeve cap against the feed dogs, and they're going to pull it through a little bit faster than the arm's eye. So I'm going to go over to the machine and I'm going to sew this in. It'll be a little bit boring, but I'll tell some stories. I know, to make them up, but I'm ready. All right, here I am at the machine. So sleeve down against the feed dogs. And this pattern has a 3/8 inch seam allowance, so that's what I'm using. And I'm gonna do a little back stitching. I posted in the Confident Stitch community recently. Oh, I forgot to mention that I always pin with my balls out so that regardless of which fabric I have against the feed dogs, I can always pull my pins out before I get to them. So I'm really just going around and trusting that the feed dogs, I'm go from pin to pin, make sure that the fabric is lined up, and I can trust that the feed dogs are going to pull the bottom fabric a little bit faster than the top fabric. And it will end up being really smooth. At least it did when I did the other sleeve. So, but now it knows, it can smell that I'm on camera, so we'll see. But it's fussy. You really, you know, I do like especially near the top of the sleeve, I'm doing like an inch at a time. And making sure I call them my sewer's fingers. I feel that there are no lumps underneath. And then sew a little ways. And then here we go. Now I'm heading toward the back. I'm gonna pull this pin. And I do not like sewing over pins. I do sometimes by accident. I feel like some people do it on the regular. I don't think it's good for your machine, and I try not to. It's one of my good habits, which I don't have a ton of. So I like to keep it. So from this point, it's like the easing worked too well. Okay, here we go. Slow, slow, slow. This is, I used to sew a sleeve in not super slow. And, you know, that meant that I just had to redo it a million times and it got much harder. And if you just go super slow the first time, it will most likely go in and you don't have to do it 8 times and pull out a whole bunch of puckers. But yeah, your sewer's finger, I can feel that there are no puckers under there, and I can see that my edges are lined up, and here I go.
I've got a question from Jen. She wants to know, are there notches on the arm side piece to help position the cap sleeve, or do you just move the cap sleeve piece using your best judgment?
I actually just kind of use my best judgment. In this pattern, I mean, most sleeves do have notches for the front and the back. There's 2 notches on the back and 1 on the front, and they match up with notches in the arm's eye. But this particular pattern did not have notches in the arm's eye. And since it was cut on the fold, both the front and the back had 2 notches. So I use my best judgment. It seems like there was a notch on the sleeve cap. So, and I know that it's usually, you just go 1 to 1 and tell the notch. So that's what I did, even though there was no notch on the arm side. So yeah, I think this pattern, this Charli Anne pattern, it turned out really, really cute, but it's best if you have a little bit of experience to draw on. So now I'm going to go back over to the ironing area and pull out my tailor's ham, which I love. And I'm just hoping there's no puckers. Oh, there is a little pucker. Well, maybe not. I can press that one out. Yeah, if there are, I'm not going to fix them this time. But at this point, I would always check for puckers because you want to get those out as soon as possible. And so the great thing about a tailor's ham is that you can press curves and continue to honor the curve. And traditionally, you press the seam allowance, the sleeve seam allowance, toward the sleeve. So I need to, oh yeah, toward the sleeve. So I'm gonna put this on my tailor's ham. There's so much curving going on in this project that a tailor's ham is really helpful. And then I'm trying not to stretch, but I do want a nice crease here. So just kind of get everything in place and press it from the right side. Just nudge everything so that the seam allowance goes toward the sleeve, and this area is nice and flat. And I'm really not ironing the whole sleeve. I'm just making sure that this seam is going in the direction I want it to go and is nice and flat. You can see how I love rayon so much. It just, boom, you tell it to do something and it obeys. Cotton does too, but not quite as enthusiastically. But you can see that it's turning out nice and flat. And one more little inch. And let's see. So this is I used one of my unhemmed ones, but you can see that the flutter sleeve is in, and the next step would just be to right sides together, line up the underarm seams and the edges of the sleeve, which are actually hemmed, and then sew the side seams, and you will have a flutter sleeve installed in a beautiful wrap dress. So that is it for flutter sleeves. Are there any other questions, Lane?
Not yet, no.
Okay. All right, so that's how you do it. And in the YouTube version of this, I will write out all of my steps. And I know it's a lot of steps, but it really makes it very stress-free to do a long curved hem. And just as a reminder, it is our semi-annual sale. Today's the first day if you're watching on the 5th, and it will go until September 12th, 2020. And next Wednesday, I'm going to be talking about sewing with knits generally, and then I'll get started making a really cute t-shirt from Liesl & Co. So I hope you'll join me, and I hope you have a great Labor Day weekend, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.